The mother of a 33-year-old woman stabbed to death last month is speaking out as her grandsons, who were also stabbed, continue to recover in the hospital.
It's just so fresh and so new that I just wish it wasn't true. So I don't know. I'm sure we will. And her sons are so smart and so intelligent that I'm sure that they'll probably be the ones to come up with the way that they want to honor their mother.
They're very strong young men, and they get that from their mother. Their mother was a very strong, wonderful individual, and she was took for us too early.
A devoted mother found stabbed to death. Her children, targets in a blood-soaked rampage. And the man accused, a correctional officer trained to enforce order. What went so wrong in the Chicago home? This isn't a random act of violence. It's a brutal case of domestic homicide that escalated into a citywide Amber Alert. What happens when the person meant to protect becomes a predator? The safety of one's home is a common assumption, especially for a mother raising young children. T.O. Mercedes Jones, a 33-year-old mother of 3 boys, believed that the 4 walls of her Southside Chicago apartment could shelter her children from harm. But on February 20th, 2025, her home turned into a crime scene that would leave the city stunned and a family destroyed. At 7:30 a.m., 911 calls began pouring in. Neighbors reported screaming. A bloodied child was seen running from the building. When authorities arrived, they found T.O. Jones stabbed multiple times in her bedroom. Her lifeless body lay on the floor. Her 2 sons, aged 8 and 11, were also stabbed, barely clinging to life. The youngest, 5, was missing. Within hours, an Amber Alert was issued across Illinois and Indiana. The suspect, Marcus Bousley, a 40-year-old correctional officer and T.O.'s former partner. He wasn't just a uniformed officer. He was a father figure to the boys and had been in and out of T.O.'s life for years. What was initially thought to be a domestic dispute quickly unraveled into something far more calculated. Marcus fled the state with a 5-year-old. Law enforcement located him in Indiana after a police chase. He was apprehended. The missing child recovered, and a family left permanently altered. This case is not just about a murder. It's about control, access, proximity, and systemic failure. How does someone entrusted with public safety become a private threat? What signs were missed? What role did silence play in escalating the abuse? Stay with us as we unravel this shocking story and uncover the heartbreaking details of what led to this senseless loss. If you enjoy real crime stories that uncover the truth, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us share real cases, spread awareness, and give a voice to those who can't speak for themselves. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what are your thoughts as the story unfolds? Welcome to True Crime Tales, where we reveal the crimes that shock communities and the secrets hidden behind closed doors. These are real people, real events, real consequences. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's begin. T.O. Mercedes Jones was a 33-year-old mother residing on the south side of Chicago. She lived in a modest apartment and shared the space with her 3 sons, aged 5, 8, and 11. Her daily life revolved around meeting the needs of her children, navigating financial constraints, and managing a volatile relationship with her former partner, Marcus Bousley. T.O. did not have a high-profile job or presence in media, but she was well known in her immediate circle. Friends, family members, neighbors, and school staff described her as a responsible and dependable woman. She had a calm demeanor and rarely got into confrontations publicly. Her role in the community, although informal, was that of a parent who stayed engaged in her children's academic and extracurricular lives. Teachers at the local elementary school recalled her as someone who attended parent-teacher meetings regularly, brought snacks for classroom events, and volunteered during school activities when she could find the time. Her income came from part-time work. She occasionally worked in childcare, cleaning services, and retail. These jobs did not offer long-term security or benefits, but they provided enough to keep her family afloat. T.O. often picked up extra shifts on weekends. There was no steady stream of financial support from Marcus Bousley, her former partner, and the man later accused of murdering her. The relationship between T.O. and Bousley was described by family members as unstable. They had known each other for several years. The relationship was not legally bound by marriage, but it was long-standing and intermittent. He had no biological children with Tion, but played a paternal role in the lives of her 3 sons, particularly the youngest, who reportedly viewed him as a father figure. Family members and friends later confirmed that Tion had experienced problems with Marcus in the past. According to statements made by her 2 brothers, she often kept these problems quiet. There were instances of verbal arguments, controlling behavior, and at least one incident where physical intimidation was involved. However, these events were typically handled privately. Tion did not file police reports in most cases. When she did, the follow-up was minimal. There are no known protective orders in her name. The lack of legal documentation made it difficult for others to intervene or for law enforcement to track escalating behavior over time. Community members described Marcus as someone who appeared helpful and respectful in public. This contrast between his public persona and private behavior made it harder for people to identify warning signs. Some neighbors noted that they saw Marcus come and go from Tion's residence over the years, particularly when she seemed to need help with childcare or home repairs. He was seen playing with the boys outside and occasionally picking them up from school. This inconsistent involvement may have contributed to a sense of misplaced trust. Despite their recurring disagreements, Marcus retained access to Tion and her children. He had keys to the apartment at various times. Family members claim he occasionally stayed the night under the guise of co-parenting support, even when the relationship was strained. These overlapping boundaries likely created confusion for both Tion and her children, as well as for any external agencies that might have intervened. According to one of Tion's co-workers, she was looking for ways to permanently sever ties with Marcus during the final months of her life. There are indications that she had discussed relocating or applying for a restraining order, but no legal steps have been confirmed prior to the fatal incident. Tion's support network was limited. While she had brothers who cared for her deeply, she often declined their offers to intervene in her relationship matters. She reportedly told them that she didn't want to escalate tensions and preferred to keep things calm for the sake of the children. This approach, while well-intentioned, resulted in further isolation. At church, Tion was described as quiet but reliable. She occasionally brought her children to Sunday school and volunteered during community food drives. She did not openly discuss her personal life in detail, but church members noted that she once asked for prayers regarding complicated family matters. There is no record of her seeking shelter, emergency services, or domestic violence counseling through religious organizations. Medical records, as reported in case filings, did not show repeated ER visits or documented injuries, which is common in many domestic violence cases where victims avoid hospitals out of fear or shame. This absence of medical evidence may have further limited external suspicion about her domestic situation. Her 3 sons, all enrolled in local public schools, were reportedly well-behaved and maintained regular attendance. Teachers said the children were respectful and quiet. There was no formal documentation from Child Protective Services indicating abuse or neglect, which suggests that Tion's home was perceived as stable from the outside. It is important to note that a lack of reported abuse or official documentation does not equate to safety. In many domestic violence cases, victims do not report due to fear of retaliation, distrust in the system, or hope for change. Tion's case falls into that category. Her silence was not a sign of consent. It was a coping mechanism shaped by years of managing chaos privately. After her death, investigators pieced together fragments of her life from cell phone records, text messages, and conversations with friends and family. These revealed that she had increasingly expressed discomfort with Marcus's presence in her life. There were messages to friends hinting at her desire to move on and shield her children from further instability. Unfortunately, those plans were not finalized before February 20th. 2025, the day she was killed. Tion Mercedes Jones was not a public figure. Her life was ordinary by most measures, but her story is not insignificant. She represents a larger population of women navigating economic pressure, parenting challenges, and unresolved domestic conflict. Her case underscores how easily abuse can be masked in everyday life, how proximity and familiarity can override caution, and how silence can allow escalating behavior to continue without intervention. The focus now turns to the criminal proceedings against Marcus Bousley. But before the trial, before the charges, and before the headlines, there was Tion, a mother managing her responsibilities, trying to keep peace in her home, and ultimately caught in a deadly cycle she couldn't escape. Why do victims of domestic violence often avoid seeking legal protection? How can communities become more proactive in identifying silent victims like Tion? Should law enforcement be required to investigate all reports of domestic conflict, even without formal charges? What systems failed Tion before her death, and what could be done to prevent similar cases? Tion Mercedes Jones and Marcus Bousley had a turbulent relationship that spanned several years. Bousley, a 40-year-old correctional officer employed by the Illinois Department of Corrections, was intermittently involved in Jones's household, often staying with her and her 3 children. Although no official restraining orders were on record, multiple sources later confirmed that arguments between the two were frequent, some escalating into threats and physical intimidation. However, Jones had never filed formal police complaints. In the weeks before the murder, witnesses stated that Bousley had become more possessive. Tion was reportedly trying to distance herself from the relationship. Family members described her making plans to remove him from her home permanently. On February 18th, Jones allegedly told a cousin over text that she needed space and was planning to ask Bousley to move out. There is no indication this message was shared with law enforcement. Bousley remained in the house on February 19th. Security camera footage from neighbors captured him entering and exiting the residence several times that day. At approximately 10:30 p.m., neighbors reported hearing shouting from a unit, but number 911 call was made. At approximately 7:15 a.m., Marcus Bousley launched a violent attack inside the residence. Reports indicate the attack began in the master bedroom. Tion Jones was stabbed repeatedly with a kitchen knife. The number of stab wounds has not been publicly disclosed, but prosecutors describe the attack as sustained and targeted. 2 of Tion's sons, aged 8 and 11, were also stabbed. It's believed they either witnessed the killing or intervened to protect their mother. The 5-year-old child was not injured at the scene. Bousley allegedly took the youngest boy with him upon fleeing. By 7:29 a.m., neighbors heard one of the injured children screaming and saw him staggering outside the building with visible blood loss. A bystander called 911. First responders arrived at the apartment at 7:38 a.m. Inside the residence, responders found Tion deceased in her bedroom. The 2 older boys were found conscious but with multiple stab wounds. Emergency services transported them to Comer Children's Hospital in critical condition. The youngest son was not at the scene, prompting police to issue a statewide Amber Alert. The Amber Alert was issued at 9:12 a.m. across Illinois, with an initial focus on the South Side and surrounding Chicago suburbs. The alert identified Marcus Bousley as the suspect and included vehicle details obtained from license plate recognition software. The vehicle in question, a silver Hyundai sedan registered to Bousley's mother, had been picked up by traffic cameras heading east on I-80 toward Indiana. Given the violent nature of the crime and the suspect's law enforcement background, the FBI and Indiana State Police were also notified. Highway patrol teams were deployed at major interchanges across the Indiana border. At 10:41 a.m., Indiana State Police located the suspect's vehicle in Hammond, Indiana. An attempted traffic stop was initiated, but Bousley fled. A high-speed chase followed, reaching speeds over 90 miles per hour on local roads. Officers used a pit maneuver at 10:57 a.m. to disable the vehicle. Bousley was apprehended at gunpoint without further incident. The 5-year-old boy was found in the back seat of the vehicle, conscious and physically unharmed. He was taken to a nearby hospital for evaluation and later reunited with relatives. Authorities extradited Bousley back to Illinois within 24 hours. He was charged with first-degree murder, attempted murder, aggravated battery to a child, and aggravated kidnapping. Should Amber Alerts automatically trigger when a child is removed from a crime scene involving domestic violence? Why or why not? The crime scene was located inside a second-floor apartment in a multi-unit building on Chicago's South Side. The apartment was in disarray upon police arrival. Blood spatter was visible in the hallway, master bedroom, and parts of the living room. Overturned furniture indicated signs of a physical struggle. Investigators documented multiple footprints, both adult and child, in blood. 2 kitchen knives were recovered from the premises. One was confirmed to be the murder weapon. There were no signs of forced entry, confirming that Bousley had access to the home and was inside prior to the attack. The scene was described by authorities as extremely violent and indicative of premeditation. Law enforcement secured the apartment for over 48 hours for evidence collection. Murder weapon, 8-inch kitchen knife with Tion Jones's blood and Bousley's fingerprints. Clothing. Bloody clothing belonging to Bousley was left inside the bathroom. Surveillance. Nearby doorbell camera footage showing Bousley leaving the building with a 5-year-old at 7:31 a.m. Digital evidence. Cell phones belonging to both Tion and Bousley were recovered. Text messages from days prior indicated rising tension. Crime scene technicians collected DNA, fingerprints, and blood samples. The items were sent to the Illinois State Police Crime Lab for forensic analysis. Tion Mercedes Jones, pronounced dead at the scene. Multiple stab wounds to the upper torso and neck. No signs of gunfire or blunt force trauma. 8-year-old son, sustained stab wounds to the abdomen and arm. Treated with emergency surgery. 11-year-old son suffered puncture wounds to the shoulder and leg. Also underwent surgery. Both surviving children were stabilized and transferred protective custody under Child Welfare Services after discharge. Trauma counseling was initiated. Witnesses and family sources stated that the 11-year-old son attempted to shield his mother during the assault. He was conscious enough to help his younger brother escape and to seek help from neighbors. His testimony was critical in confirming Bousley's involvement before his capture. The 8-year-old was semi-conscious when first responders arrived and was unable to speak until after surgery. Both boys were later interviewed by forensic child psychologists and detectives from the Chicago Police Department's Special Victims Unit. The 5-year-old, who was abducted, displayed signs of emotional distress but was not physically harmed. He was reportedly quiet and withdrawn in the immediate hours after recovery. Following the fatal attack on Tion Mercedes Jones on February 20th, 2025, her 2 surviving sons, ages 8 and 11, were transported immediately to a nearby trauma center. Both children sustained multiple stab wounds and required emergency surgery. Medical reports indicated that while the injuries were serious, prompt intervention prevented fatal outcomes. The younger son, age 5, who was abducted during the attack, was found unharmed but in distress following a police chase in Indiana. Medical personnel confirmed that both injured boys will require extensive recovery time, including physical therapy for wound healing and psychological evaluation for trauma. Hospital social workers coordinated with Child Protective Services to ensure their safety and place the children under temporary foster care while the investigation proceeded. Psychological experts were involved to assess the short and long-term impact of the violence on the children's development and mental health. The funeral for Tion Jones was held 10 days after her death in a local church on Chicago's South Side. The service was attended by immediate family, friends, and community members. Public memorials were established at the church and local community centers to honor her memory.
Today, community members gathered for a vigil remembering the life of Tiana Jones. Police say Jones and her 2 sons were stabbed in a brutal attack by her boyfriend last week. While the 2 children remain hospitalized, the family is preparing to lay Jones to rest. Andrew Ramos live in the newsroom for us with more on today's vigil. Andrew, good evening.
Good evening, Chris. Well, it was a gathering of both faith leaders and community advocates who are now shining a light on this Southside family at such a dark time. Now, the goal, they say, is to make sure a tragedy like this never happens again.
We lift up this Jones family. We lift up the children, the mother, the brothers.
More than 48 hours after tragedy struck this community, hope remains high. Today, leaders offered up prayers and condolences for the family of Tiana Jones. Her young sons, ages 11 and 8, are still recovering after multiple surgeries at Comer Children's Hospital. Jones was fatally stabbed at her home on the 7100 block of South Eberhard. The suspect arrested and charged in the case has since been identified as Jones's boyfriend, Marcus Bosley. Police say Bosley kidnapped her children, which sparked an Amber Alert. One of the children escaped the car somehow and found help with a neighbor. The other boy was found hours later after showing up at a gas station on 79th and Damon. Both were stabbed. The community now determined to support this grieving family, as well as make sure victims of domestic violence get the resources they need before it's too late.
These kids are going to be traumatized for the rest of their natural life. So we want to support this family. We want to support this community. They are motherless and fatherless kids now. So that's a lot to deal with.
Our office will be making sure that women all throughout this ward, especially in the month of March, when we will celebrate sheroes all across and women's stories, the stories should not end like this.
Now, Balsley, who was caught in Indiana early Friday morning, is awaiting extradition to Chicago. He has been charged with attempted murder and kidnapping, among other charges. Live in the newsroom, I'm Andrew Ramos, CBS News, Chicago. Chris?
Andrew, thanks very much.
Family statements made during the funeral emphasized the loss's gravity without revealing details of the domestic dispute or the accused's identity. The family requested privacy during the legal proceedings and focused on preserving the dignity of the deceased. No public comments were made on the investigation status at this time. In the wake of the tragedy, local agencies specializing in domestic violence and trauma response mobilized to provide assistance to those affected by the incident, particularly the children and family members. The Chicago Domestic Violence Prevention Coalition dispatched crisis counselors to support family, friends, and community members dealing with grief and shock. Counseling resources included trauma-informed therapy sessions and support groups for children exposed to domestic violence. Child psychologists were specifically assigned to monitor the boys' recovery and work with foster care providers to create stable, nurturing environments. The local police department also collaborated with social service agencies to raise awareness of domestic violence signs and prevention measures, using the case as a platform for community education. Workshops and public forums were organized to engage residents on the importance of reporting abuse early and accessing available support. Media coverage of the case was widespread across local and national outlets, reporting the facts of the homicide, the manhunt for Marcus Balsley, and the eventual arrest. Coverage focused heavily on the horrific nature of the attack and the breach of trust involved. Given Balsley's profession as a correctional officer, some outlets published detailed accounts of the relationship history between Tion and Balsley, citing court records and law enforcement sources. However, there was criticism from advocacy groups regarding the media's framing of the story, which some claim prioritized sensationalism over the victim's humanity. Social media platforms saw significant public discourse, with many users expressing outrage over the violence and concern for surviving children. Several domestic violence organizations used the case to highlight the systemic issues that allow abusers to maintain power over victims. Is the media doing enough to humanize domestic violence victims, or do they sensationalize the tragedy? Marcus Balsley was formally charged with multiple offenses related to the attack. The charges included first-degree murder for the death of T.O. Mercedes Jones, 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder for stabbing of the 2 sons, aggravated kidnapping related to the abduction of the youngest child, and multiple count of aggravated battery of a child under 13. The charges reflect the prosecution's assessment of the premeditation involved in the attack and severity of the injuries inflicted on the children. Prosecutors have classified the case as a domestic violent homicide aggravated by child endangerment. At the initial court hearing, the prosecution requested that Balsley be held without bail due to the violent nature of the charges and his flight from the state. The judge agreed, setting bail at a prohibitively high amount, effectively ensuring Balsley's detention pending trial. In addition, the court ordered comprehensive psychological evaluations to assess Balsley's mental state at the time of the crime and his competency to stand trial. These assessments are standard procedure in cases involving violent crimes, particularly those with domestic violence elements. Psychiatrists and forensic psychologists conducted multiple evaluations examining Balsley's history, possible motives, and mental health diagnoses. These reports will be used by both the prosecution and defense during trial preparations. Public statements from Tion Jones' family have been limited and carefully managed. The family issued a brief written statement emphasizing their desire for justice and the protection of the surviving children's privacy. They have retained legal counsel to represent their interests in court proceedings, particularly regarding custody and child welfare matters.
The family of Tion Jones say they are taking it one day at a time as they continue to grieve their loved one. The 8 and 11-year-old boys are still at the hospital recovering from their injuries.
Doctor said that they most likely going to make it out of it. I've talked to Darius, but he has something in his mouth where he can't speak. But Tristan, he's been talking nonstop since surgery.
Family and community members are still trying to wrap their heads around the tragedy that unfolded Thursday night. Police say Tion Jones was stabbed inside a home near 72nd Street in South Eberhard. She died at the hospital. An Amber Alert then went out for her 8-year-old son, who was later found. Investigators say the 8-year-old boy and his 11-year-old brother were both stabbed multiple times. Sunday, community leaders held a prayer vigil for the family.
We need to make sure those kids are provided for, they have the necessary counseling they need. Because, I mean, I can't imagine. I don't want to imagine what they're going through.
Among the people in attendance, Cynthia Keel, the Good Samaritan who says the 11-year-old boy came knocking at her home near 66th and Yale in desperate need of help.
And I just feel like the light of God and the light of safety shines through our home, where people know this is a place where we can come and get the support, the assistance that we need. So I'm grateful to be that.
Maybe it could have been prevented if somebody would have said something that they saw on the internet, saw when they was getting out the car.
Community members also passed out flyers with resources for anyone experiencing domestic violence. They are also encouraging neighbors to speak out if they witness anything.
Marcus Bousley's defense attorneys have indicated that they are reviewing the evidence and preparing to challenge the prosecution's case. They have requested discovery materials and are expected to raise issues related to Bousley's mental health as part of their defense strategy. The trial is expected to begin within 12 to 18 months following the initial charges, consistent with a typical time frame for cases involving multiple serious felony charges. Pre-trial motions, including those addressing evidence admissibility and competency hearings, will be scheduled in the coming months. Given the high-profile nature of the case, court officials have indicated the trial will likely be conducted with heightened security and media restrictions to ensure due process. Cases like that of Tion Mercedes Jones often prompt a fundamental question. Why do victims remain in abusive relationships? The answer is complex, rooted in psychological, social, and practical factors. Victims may stay due to fear of escalation, financial dependence, concerns about their children's well-being, social stigma, or hope that the abuser will change. In Tion's case, reports from friends and family indicate a long-term, tumultuous relationship with Marcus Bousley marked by intermittent abuse and reconciliation. These cycles of violence followed by periods of calm are characteristic of many domestic violence situations, creating a powerful psychological hold. Victims often endure repeated episodes of control, manipulation, and intimidation, which erode their sense of autonomy and safety. Victims may also lack adequate external support or believe that authorities will not intervene effectively. In some cases, abusers isolate their partners from friends and family, limiting their resources and options. Tion's silence about the full extent of abuse is not unusual, reflecting a pattern where victims avoid disclosure due to fear of not being believed or concerns over retaliation. Domestic violence is less about isolated acts of physical violence and more about ongoing patterns of control. The perpetrator uses physical violence, emotional abuse, threats, and intimidation to maintain dominance. This dynamic creates a psychological environment where the victim's actions and decisions are heavily influenced by fear. Marcus Bousley, as a correctional officer, had training in authority and control, which may have contributed to his approach in the relationship. The use of violence to assert control is consistent with documented patterns among abusers who seek to maintain power over their victims. Such individuals often display behaviors including jealousy, possessiveness, and coercive control tactics, which escalate over time. The fear experienced by victims is not limited to physical harm. It includes concerns about losing custody of children, economic insecurity, social isolation, and sometimes a deeply ingrained sense of loyalty or emotional attachment to the abuser. This complex fear can trap victims in cycles of abuse despite the risks to their safety. A critical examination of this case reveals potential institutional shortcomings in addressing domestic violence. Police reports show that there were previous calls to law enforcement related to disturbances involving Tion and Marcus. However, no permanent protective orders or effective interventions appear to have been implemented. Court-issued protection orders, while designed to offer safety, often fail to prevent violence due to enforcement challenges, lack of resources, and perpetrators' disregard for legal restrictions. In some instances, victims do not pursue or are unaware of such legal options due to fear or mistrust of the system. Law enforcement agencies are sometimes limited in their response by procedural constraints or insufficient training to manage domestic violence cases effectively. Follow-up on reports and coordinated community support are frequently lacking, which can leave victims vulnerable. The system's reactive nature, responding only after violence occurs, rather than proactive approach that focuses on prevention and victim empowerment, contributes to repeated incidents. The tragic outcome in Tion's case underscores the need for improved mechanisms to identify risk and intervene earlier. Domestic homicide remains a significant public safety concern in the United States. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention (CDC), approximately 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men experience intimate partner violence during their lifetime. Homicides linked to domestic violence constitute a notable portion of overall homicide rates. Data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics indicates that about 50% of female homicide victims are killed by a current or former intimate partner. These statistics highlight the high risk associated with domestic abuse situations escalating to fatal outcomes. Children are also victims, either directly, as in the stabbing of Tion's sons, or indirectly through psychological trauma and loss. The presence of children increases the complexity of domestic violence cases and the urgency of intervention. These numbers reflect a systemic issue requiring comprehensive legal, social, and public health responses. What legal changes could help prevent repeat domestic violence offenders from harming again? Consider measures such as enhanced risk assessment protocols, mandatory offender rehabilitation programs, improved protective order enforcement, and increased funding for victim support services. How can legislation be strengthened to reduce recidivism among domestic violence perpetrators? What role should law enforcement and judicial systems play in prevention rather than reaction? Tion Mercedes Jones was a mother dedicated to her 3 children, a woman balancing multiple responsibilities while maintaining ties to her community. Her life was tragically cut short by an act of violence from someone entrusted with the safety of others. The circumstances surrounding her death emphasize critical vulnerabilities faced by domestic violence victims, especially when abusers have access to weapons and authority positions. 2 of Tion's sons survived the attack, but sustained serious injuries. The youngest son, abducted during the incident, was recovered unharmed but remains deeply affected. The physical and emotional recovery process for these children will be ongoing and complex. Their welfare now depends on extended family, social services, and community support systems to provide stability and care in the wake of trauma. Marcus Bousley faces multiple charges, including first-degree murder and attempted murder. The legal process is ongoing, highlighting the challenges in prosecuting cases involving domestic violence where victims are unable to defend themselves. This case underlines the necessity for reforms in domestic violence prevention, including better identification of high-risk situations, more effective law enforcement responses, and comprehensive victim services. What systemic failures allowed this tragedy to occur despite previous warning signs? How can communities and authorities collaborate to better protect vulnerable families? Are current laws sufficient to prevent repeat offenses by domestic abusers, or is legislative reform needed? What role do social attitudes and stigma play in silencing victims and hindering intervention? If you found this story as gripping and heartbreaking as we did, don't forget to like this video and share it with others. And if you want to hear more true crime stories that uncover the mysteries behind these tragic events, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss our latest stories, updates, and discussions. Thank you for joining us on this journey to seek justice and explore the truth. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.